Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, coming at you with another Hammer horror review. And this time I'm doing what many people consider to be the essential Hammer Dracula film, or one of the best Dracula films. I agree to a certain extent, but that's just what I've heard as well. Dracula, Prince of Darkness from 1966. Now, this is technically the third in Hammer's Dracula series. After Horror of Dracula, there was Brides of Dracula, which the Count himself was not in, so there's no Christopher Lee, there was no Dracula. But then in 66, they got Christopher Lee back, they brought back Dracula, so technically it's the third, but in terms of a series, it's the second. And this is the Scream Factory Blu-ray, which actually, when I bought it, it had that cover, which is a great scene from the movie. I do like that cover, but I'm always a stickler for original classic covers, so I just have that one. Now, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, if I can get the thing back in there. This is a movie that I really enjoyed. Moriah Science Fiction Horror Fantasy Film Review says, Dracula Prince of Darkness, more than any of the Hammer Draculas, embodies the recurrent image of sexual repression threatening to tear Victorian society apart. And I would say this movie does build upon the more so erotic part of Dracula, or like preying on women. And it says not rated, but because there are some R-rated ones, but I would say this is when it started getting pretty gruesome, especially for the time. I mean, 1966. If you're wondering why I'm pausing, sorry. One, I'm really tired. And two, I'm just looking over the special features. I mean, this has commentaries. It has a World of Hammer episode, Dracula and the Undead, documentary Back to Black, still gallery, and trailer. The Scream Factory has really great releases. Now, one thing this film is known for is the fact that Dracula does not speak. He doesn't speak a single word in the entire movie. So you're thinking, well, how is it that good? That sounds pretty lame. Well, Christopher Lee is so good at playing Dracula, he makes mute badass. Because if you remember in his previous film, he didn't speak for the second half. When he had the bloodshot eyes and the fangs and he was in vampire mode, he was sort of in like kill mode. He was in badass mode. And he's kind of like that through the whole film. There's some reasons why. One, and the more popular one, is Christopher Lee said that he hated the dialogue that was in the script. So much so that when he read it, he even said, if you think I'm saying this, then you're sadly mistaken. Refused to speak it, and the only sounds was screams and hisses. Side note, Christopher Lee hated doing the sequels. Why he ultimately did it, I don't know. I don't like to think it was for a paycheck. But he thought Hammer wasted their time because they would write the stories first and then shoehorn Dracula in somehow later. I'm thinking he just really liked the character and just wanted to play him. I mean, many people consider him to be the essential Dracula. I mean, he played him the most. But then the other one is, I'm guessing it was John Sansom who wrote the screenplay, said, he just didn't write dialogue. He was like, vampires don't chat, they just bite and fight. So he didn't write any. So it's whichever one you believe. I kind of lean towards the Christopher Lee story. I mean, he was so sought after. Like, Hammer just wanted to use him, and especially by 66, he had become a horror icon that pretty much, I think anybody was willing to let Christopher Lee do whatever he wanted. But, alright, 6 minutes in, it starts off with this really cool intro. It's like a diamond cutout of, and that's what we see. It's the ending of the last film, the fight with Peter Cushing, Van Helsing, which there's no Peter Cushing or Van Helsing in this film, which kind of sucks, but then like around, because there's like the diamond shape with the video in it, and there's like this fog or this smoke kind of pouring out the sides of it, so that looked really cool. And then we see this sort of funeral where where this one priest named Sandor or Shandor, Father Sandor, the local authorities want to, stake the body, but he says, like, stop spreading the fear of vampirism, because Dracula was destroyed 10 years ago. And I probably should have said it first. I don't know how I forgot. Once again, we got Terrence Fisher directing this, the essential horror. I am extremely tired right now. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. I've been up on Monday morning. I've been up all weekend doing videos. I have a hard time sleeping. So Terrence Fisher, of course, directing, and it also stars Barbara Shelley, Andrew Keir, Francis Matthews, no one else I recognize. Uncredited Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, archive footage only. Okay, so then we're introduced to our 4 main characters. We have the Kents, Charles and Helen, played by Francis Matthews and Barbara Shelley. Oh yeah, they're all 4 Kents. Charles and Helen, Francis Matthews and Barbara Shelley, and then Alan and Diana, played by Charles Tingwell and Susan Farmer. 2 couples, they're tourists, and they stop off at this inn, and Father Sandor tells them, don't go towards Carlsbad. Don't go near it. Don't go near the castle. And they're just like, yeah, okay. So they get in their carriage, they start going, and then there's the castle. The coach driver gets scared, throws off their luggage, very rudely, and was like, I'll come back later. And he goes away, because it's starting to get dark. And of course, they have that part where they're like, is that the castle that they were talking about? It's like, who knows? And of course they go inside. Well, first, before they get inside, there's see, this is one of those movies, kind of like slasher films, because Well, it goes all the way back to films like The Old Dark House from the 30s, which Hammer did do a remake. But even up to slashers, where people don't see red flags and still go where they're not supposed to. Because this stagecoach with no driver comes up, stops for them. They're like, huh, cool. Must want to take us to the castle. They get in, they go to the castle. The dining table is all set with food. They're like, it must be all set for us. And so they don't think any of that's weird. But then they meet the keeper of the house named Clove, who is played by Philip Latham. Now that name looks familiar, and he looked familiar, but I'm not seeing. Well, for Hammer, he was in Devil Ship Pirates and The Secret of Blood Island. Okay, so nothing else I've seen. He's sort of like, take Angus Scrimm as the tall man for Phantasm, but give him kind of like a creepy, a Vincent Price kind of look. He's the housekeeper, and he says how his former master, Count Dracula, he died 10 years ago, but he wished that the castle always be kept up and prepared for any travelers through. They're like, oh, Dracula, what a swell guy to be like that. They get up to their rooms, their bags are already there. And then, it is really slow. This whole first half of the movie is really slow. We don't get Dracula till like 45 minutes in, which kind of sort of the opposite of the previous film, because Horror of Dracula starts right off. Like, we see Christopher Lee in like 5 minutes. But here, this movie really takes its time. It helps build the dread, even if it's very subtly, talk about the castle, and then fear of the castle, and then the mysterious coach table being set up, Clove, the housekeeper. It's gradual. So the whole 45 minutes without Dracula can work, but a lot of the dialogue scenes can take a while. One of the Kents, Alan, he hears a noise and he follows Clove down into the crypt of the castle where he's killed. And then you get this great scene that must have been insane for that time period. Which, yes, I know movies like, which I have reviewed, At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, which is way more brutal than this, but that was a cult film. It didn't really get the big exposure this one did. But he's strung up by his feet upside down over Dracula's coffin where his ashes are. And Clove cuts him open, his blood spills out, and we see Dracula take form. It's a great transformation scene. We see him go from like ashes to this corpse to looking meaty and bloody, and then his full Christopher Lee. And then Clove then entices Helen to come down to the crypt, and that's where she's Dracula's first victim. Told you I'm tired. And just, he has this way of like being very seductive. Then he bites, and then when he's done, he just like throws him away. And so the female vampire is one played by Barbara Shelley, who was a pretty big actress back then. I'm not really sure what else she did for Hammer, but she's the one in the gown, the redheaded one. So then Charles and Diana, they can't find Alan, Helen, or Clove. They start looking around. Charles finds Alan's dismembered body in a trunk down in the crypt. It's dark, so now Dracula comes out. And sort of like in the first film, Helen goes to bite Diana, and that's when you get that scene. He comes down, he stops her, and then Charles comes in. It's like, you know, pretty... I do like some of these shots, because like in the last film, not a lot of it is really up close, you know. It's like filmed almost like from above, so you get like these great running around, big open shots. And Dracula is in pissed off kill mode. Like, he is still pissed about the last movie, which took place 10 years before. And, you know, like, Charles grabs a sword off the wall and Dracula just breaks it. Helen bumps into Diana, who's wearing, you know, a necklace like this with a cross in it. It burns her. And so Charles takes his busted sword and makes a cross out of it, like Van Helsing did with the candlesticks. And they escape in a carriage, but the carriage like breaks. The horse runs away. She's knocked unconscious, and they end up. He carries her to this monastery where Father Sandor is. But of course, Clove shows up. He's not granted entry, and in his carriage, he's got the 2 caskets. And one of the patrons, because sort of like with a Universal, other than Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula and Frankenstein, the sequels have nothing to do with the original source material, again, except for Bride of Frankenstein. It's the same thing with Hammer, but this one does have a few more nods to Bram Stoker's original story. You know, for example, there's this character named Ludwig, who, he's a guy that they keep in like this cell. He's kind of messed up. When we see him, he's like polishing a shiny book, presumably a Bible. And he has a thing for flies. He even eats one. So he's Renfield. He's the Renfield character. He's even under Dracula's power without even seeing the 2 of them on screen together at first. But he's the one that sort of lets Dracula in. Because he looks out the window, he busts the bars off, we hear him saying, "Yes, master." So we got Renfield back. There is a part where Dracula opens up his shirt and lets Helen drink blood from his chest. That's in the novel. The final battle between Charles and Dracula is on the frozen moat of the place. So that's also from the book, which is kind of lame that, you know, water can kill Dracula. Or not really lame, but, you know, maybe the fact that he was trapped under ice as well. But I guess they didn't want to do sunlight again, because with a Universal, especially in like the Monster Mash movies, their later movies, it was always sunlight, and horror Dracula was sunlight. But and apparently you can sterilize a vampire bite with an oil lamp, or heat from it. because um, Diana gets bitten on her arm by Helen because Helen's like, I got away from him. You gotta let me in. This is when they're at the monastery. And she bites her arm, and you're sort of like, I guess, like a zombie bite in a way. You can sterilize it. But, yeah, then Sandor puts crucifixes in their coffins. And then that's him and Shandor arm themselves, and that's when we get the ice fight. I'm just reading something, and that's the movie. But and this was shot back to back with another film, Rasputin the Mad Monk, which so had a lot of the same sets. It also had Christopher Lee, Barbara Shelley, Francis Matthews, and Farmer, Susan Farmer, who is Diana. Barbara Shelley, I guess, accidentally swallowed one of her fangs. And because of the really tight shooting schedule, they made her chug salt water until she puked it back up and then had to continue using it. No one had spare fangs. This was on a double feature with The Plague of Zombies, which vampire fangs and cardboard zombie eye glasses were given to audience members when this was released. And, I mean, not only has this been considered like the essential Hammer Dracula film, but many people consider it the essential Hammer film, Hammer horror film. Because great direction by Terrence Fisher. Again, because like when they get away from the castle in the carriage, you get this great shot like up above, high in the castle, and you just see Dracula running outside, and like his cape is flowing, and just a really wonderful shot. Just the whole sort of showdown in the foyer of the castle, where it's like filmed from up above, so you can see everything going on. All the performances are pretty, quite serviceable, especially for the time. Christopher Lee did a great job, even with no dialogue. Like, he was able to make no dialogue interesting. Like, he was seductive when he had to be. He was badass and scary when he had to be. Like, there's even parts where he's just standing there, like, really pissed off and angry. And, this was, I think, when they were really starting to get more graphic with especially the gore. I mean, it's got plenty of blood. The whole thing about draining blood over the ashes, and then you get sort of like that Hellraiser putting together moment. Obviously not up to that level, but close. Or for that period. I would say this probably is the best Hammer horror film that I've seen so far. Yeah, some of the dialogue scenes were slow, but it had this consistent tone, consistent build-up of dread and suspense, which made all the vampire scenes that much better. I liked the additional nods to Bram Stoker, like, because I love the character of Renfield. The guy's no Dwight Fry, but he's still Renfield. and especially the drinking, the sucking the blood from the bare chest. They never been done before that, so they definitely upped the ante with the sexuality as well, because of course, you know, Britain in the 60s, tons of sexual liberation. Really solid film, especially like a sequel that isn't completely based on Bram Stoker. Like a Dracula film is not completely based on Bram Stoker, but the nods are there. Great direction by Terrence Fisher. Probably my favorite direction like that he's done that I've seen so far. Really solid, and I would say this probably is the essential Hammer horror film. I see why they call it that. Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Really solid film. For 25 minutes, probably going to shut off on me. Thank you for watching.